Welcome to Friday Facts number 407, automating a soundtrack, and I have my wonderful sound engineer with me. Mojo, how you doing?
Hello, I'm back on the surface again.
Excellent. Welcome back. Welcome back. So, we're going to go back and talk about more music. Yeah.
Music or Muzak?
Bit of both. Bit of both. Yeah.
Both?
So last week, Albert, which is, had to go look this up, he is one of the core 3 members of the old school Factorio. He's been there forever. And he is, sorry, what was his title? Art director. Art director. Yeah, he's basically in charge of art, music, sound, all sorts of things. Very top level job. So last week they posted a general approach to the Factorio space station music. We also mentioned we have some new techniques to not only cover these 5 hours of music, but also surpass them. The automatic way of making music is something I was experimenting with a long time ago before Factorio. Played with a lot of random melodies on top of bass sections with random rhythmic basses, all programmed with action script. Yes, pretty old. The results were quite
That is
intense.
pretty old.
It is very old. They were quite intense and never good enough to consider them finished tracks. When 5 Hour soundtrack project for Factorio Space had started, I merely thought of these old experiments. Now having Peter composing and Domian programming, the things look different. I just dared to go this way. Now I'm convinced this was a good decision. So variable music tracks. And this is when Domian takes over. He's a programmer. So his job is to somehow turn Albert's ideas into something that works in game. Yeah.
Yes.
So the tracks play differently each time they're selected. They're kind of procedurally generated music. We don't want to go too crazy with randomization. A variable track is much more like a set of variables of a single track without need to record them all. These tracks take place in the interludes which play between main tracks. And let's go running around hitting settings. The goal is to provide some variety in the music after tens or hundreds of hours spent in game. Regular music is still the main focus for a large majority of the soundtrack. Variable music tracks are defined in the prototype of fully available modders, and there are components used to define variable track. So first off, they have a sample, which is just a very, very short piece of audio, sort of like a letter. Yeah. And then you have
More like a MIDI sound, maybe like a MIDI sound even.
Yeah, like a MIDI sound. Yeah.
Even though MIDI doesn't actually have sound associated with it.
Yes, Mojo. We're moving
Just to
on.
be pedantic before someone tells me off.
Yeah. Then we have
I
layers.
know the difference.
So layers is like a group of samples joined together, which is sort of like letters joined together to get you a word. Yeah. And they could be selected randomly, shuffling all available samples to play exactly once, or they may be more complicated with samples being selected based on the samples currently playing in a different layer. Layers also contain sub-layers where samples overlap in a specific way. Further variations with a layer can be done using number of properties, defining the delayed start, number of repetitions, pause between repetitions for shuffled layers, offset of overlapping sub-layers. These properties can come from layers themselves or according to the current state of the track. So layers is where we have a whole bunch of samples to make a word, and then we say we can't use the word too often, because if you use swear words too often, you sound like an Australian. And yes, you can have
Or a bogan.
Yes, and you can have a swear word every second word in Australian language perfectly fine. Don't question it. Then we have sections. So sections is where we take groups of letters which we've turned to words, and then groups of words, and we turn them into a sentence. And there can be one section or multiple of them in a track. The section we use is determined by the track state. Additionally, sections can overlap, where there is only one section can overlap itself. Lastly, section contain an intermezzo, which is played as a normal piece of music, providing an option to compose a hybrid track, part variable, part static. So there is going to be proper recorded music inside a section as well. Yeah. Rather than just made up of lots of random bits of pieces that are put together in some sort of chain of letters that hopefully forms words that hopefully form sentences. Yeah, let's go with that. And then we have states. So states are transition between the high level way to define how a variable track is composed. They select which section should play and whether it should overlap the previous one, and they define a number of layer properties which are applied to the current section's layers. Transitions between states can be based on elapsed time, or they can be tied to a specific layer of finishing. Multiple possible next states can be defined with different weights, so some transitions are going to be more likely than others. Next state candidates can have additional conditions defined. These conditions have to be met for the state to be considered for the transition. For example, transition can only happen if a specific sample is playing a specific layer at the time of the next selection. So that's a paragraph.
That's the thing that happened. That's so what we got. We got letters that turn into sentences.
No,
and then
letters that turn to
mix them all
words.
together,
Well,
and we have a word salad.
letters to words, words to sentences, sentences to paragraphs. That's your 4 states.
I still like the idea of it being a word salad.
Oh, it's 100% a word salad. Okay. So now I know how variable tracks are made of. Let's look at a couple of examples of how a track gets composed. Please understand that the examples are a tech demo, still in progress. Some details may change. The music itself is not representative of what it will be in the game on release. These samples are quite old and made for illustration purposes only. Okay, so let's go back to the start of this because we have a...
Somebody didn't remember to reset it.
Yes, it's fine. I probably didn't reset the next one either. Okay. The first track, the first example is just a track. So this is going to be a single piece of music that's played between the actual proper music of the sound track that's part of the 5 hours we spoke about last week. So we've got a grid. This is for tempo. It's, if you've dealt with music previously, especially in a software sense, you're used to seeing this. Okay. And then we have a single sample. And then the sample has a second sample, being the second track, which has an offset, and that's how you get 2 different beats. Yep. And
that's our layers.
That's the layers. Yep. If you're doing video editing or to a certain extent photo editing as well, you'll be very familiar with layers. I do a whole lot of video editing, obviously, and I have multiple video layers and multiple audio layers all the time that I have to deal with. Also, why mistakes happen, because you sometimes have 12 different layers you're dealing with. Yes.
Skill issue.
Yeah. Hang on, how many YouTube videos do you make now?
Moving swiftly along.
Yeah. So then, samples selected randomly. However, the same sample can't be repeated immediately. So we go from sample 1 to sample 3 to sample 4. And then, because sample 4 is played, sample 3 can be played again, because that's not right on the back of sample 3. And then we have overlap offsets can be variable. Either 1 or 2 limits, either 1 or 2 time units for the base layer. Yep. So it's that's the transition. Yes. That's the transition between one sample and the next. Yeah. And then we can have that multiple times. Yeah.
It just keeps going over and over.
Yeah, but it's got variation in it, and that's really what they're trying to get to. They're trying to say, look, we've made music out of a whole lot of little bits of music that we've put together, which is basically what most music is. It's all a bunch of notes that you're overlapping one with another, except they're doing it with programming, which we're going to get more into in a second. So then this is our first layer, the top 2. Yes. And then we start a second layer on top. So this has 2 sub layers, and then it fills out more music, and then more music, and then a third layer, and so on and so forth. So you end up with multiple bits of sound playing over one another, which honestly, it happens all the time. You're quite used to it in just about every song you've ever heard, so it shouldn't be an issue. But then we have details of how the track is going to sound. I'm not going to play the whole 30 minutes. We're just going to jump through it a couple of times, because it's
pretty long.
It's long, but yeah. That's enough. So it sounds okay. Like, it's not great, but it's not horrible.
Fine.
And honestly,
it should also be noted, just briefly. It
Uh-huh.
has been confirmed because people have been absolutely raging on the forums and Reddit about it that that track won't be in the game. So it's just a tech demo.
It's a tech demo, yeah. Now, the thing is that if you've probably heard something similar to this, and you've probably heard it with YouTube videos and or uh, low budget games like indie games. They'll use free music, which is not. This is definitely generated by. I won't say AI because it's definitely not AI. It's scripted. There are certain rules that a program has to follow to play these different samples in this order to put together something that's randomized each time.
Well,
Oh,
it's generated by the actual system that they're developing. It's just the quality of the samples is just to prove the point. It's not necessarily well arranged
yeah, well, they're not.
samples.
That's right. That's right. It's lacking the human touch to go, well,
Yeah.
that sample and that sample don't work well together. Let's split them out and do something different. There's a whole lot of predefined rules, and the program's doing a pretty good job of mixing them together. And like I said, if you've listened to indie games with their soundtracks, which a lot of indie games might ship with like 3 soundtracks total, all right? So like 3 music tracks. That's it. You might only have 20 minutes worth of music.
How many tracks did Captain of Industry start with?
Oh, it started with like full 15 on early access. They did really well with the music, and they've added more since.
It only
But
lasted like 30 minutes, from what I remember.
no, it was way longer than that. It's in my audio edit. It's over an hour and something. Dyson Sphere shipped with like 5 tracks, and then have expanded it like every update. They've added more. Satisfactory shipped with like 3 tracks.
Oh,
That
that
was
had
it.
nothing.
Because that's all they had. And even then, it's like Satisfactory is waiting for their release into full release for them to have the soundtrack available on Steam so you can buy it. But I think there's still. I think I've only heard like 12 tracks total, which is about an hour's worth. But out of a lot of games, you're going to spend, like Satisfactory Factorio, you're going to spend a lot more than 5 hours playing the game. 50 is a low end, so you're going to hear the soundtrack 10 times. You're going to be jack of it after 10 times. Factorio is somewhat unique because they have pauses between like one track and the next track, and the tracks are also randomized. And this is just doing that and taking it to the next level. Rather than having, they're still going to have the pauses between soundtracks, but they're going to try and fill in some of the pauses with something else, something that sort of fits the theme of the rest of the soundtrack or the rest of the sound of the game, but is also something that they can procedurally generate, which is always going to be different every time. Anyway, so another example, which I definitely remember to reset. So we have the second example shows a track with only one selection, but overlaps itself when transitioning between states of a fixed time. Intervals. The section has 3 layers, also a chance to play an intermezzo, which is a specific sample played in the first layer. So that's an actual piece of some person made that bit of music. So then this is track number 5, which has, or sample number 5, no. Layer number 5? Whatever. It's piece number 5, which has the options of 13, 14, or 15 to come after it. And we got 13. And then it means that only 15 can come after that because that's one of the 2 remaining choices. And then after a 40-second delay, we get a state change so then a new piece can play. So the sample of the first layer is randomized again. And then that happened to be 6, which then can have either 16, 17, or 18 play after it. It got an 18 and a 16. And then we can play sample number 6 in the first layer had a 50% chance to trigger a transition to an intermezzo instead of overlaying itself again for the next stage. So this is when we either overlap again or we go to a piece of music that's actually been recorded again and end. And again, we've got a little sample. I can definitely go, yeah, that would work if you're on the spaceship.
Yep. Or I think that was intended to be the similar sound to the electric planet.
Maybe, maybe. But yeah, I don't see any major problems with this so far. So as it turns out, when it comes to music, timing and transition things correctly is important. I know, I was shocked too. So queuing samples. Samples need to be played one after another without any gaps in order to maintain the track's overall tempo and avoid audio artifacts, as somebody in our forum recently found out the hard way. Where somebody in the forums,
That's a rabbit hole in and of itself. A
somebody in the
fairly hilarious rabbit hole.
forums tried to use the speaker in the game to play music and have it start and stop perfectly within ticks, which is sort of the point you have to be to get music to work, and to do things like cut up audio, cut up voice, cut up that sort of stuff. It needs to be timed perfectly, otherwise it just sounds odd. It just sounds a little bit off. Yeah, they couldn't get it perfectly.
It should also be noted that so their download has it replaces a bunch of sounds or adds new sounds to the speaker so that they can use. So it's a custom mod as well as a blueprint
Yeah,
for the thing that plays the sound.
yeah. So it's a blueprint with some added sounds, but the problem is they're trying to not play a long piece of music. They're trying to do essentially what they're trying to do here in Friday Facts number 407. They're trying to play little samples over multiple speakers, and it's just off slightly. And this is when we talk about what caused it to be off. So
it's almost like they're trying to do a slam player in Factorio, which in and of itself is hilariously impressive.
yeah. So the music player updates 60 times per second, same as the rest of the game logic. Simply checking if a current sample has finished playing to start a new sample is not enough, as there could be up to a 16.67 1/60th of a second gap between them, destroying the tempo. Taking the checks outside the regular update logic into a separate thread, or using callbacks for when a sample finishes playing wouldn't work either, because how audio data are mixed together by the SDL mixer library version 2 blah we're using. So the current settings audio is muxed in chunks of 512 samples. These are audio signal samples, not music samples, which is sampling the frequency of 44.1 kilohertz, making the mixing interval roughly 11.6 milliseconds. Even if we detected the exact moment when a sampling finish plays, we wouldn't be able to start playing the next sample at the right moment. There'd be a gap up to 11.6 milliseconds long. What I really need is a way to queue our music samples. The mixer library doesn't provide such functionality. I need to build myself on top of the mixer library with some modifications to the mixer library itself. Not the first time I needed to add a feature to the audio backend, so uninterrupted, I had a queuing system working fairly quickly. Now the music player can queue samples in its leisurely 16.67 millisecond window, and a separate feeder thread take care of the stitching the samples together correctly, while the mixer doesn't even know what happened. So then they can start transitioning between samples. So
it's actually kind of concerning that SDL doesn't come with a pipeline already, just by the way that's written. It seems like something very fundamental for a backend to have.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, most people are not trying to mix things so close to one another that a 1/60th of a second doesn't matter.
Because I would have to dig into how the mixer library works to understand the logic, but it's probably not designed. It may turn out that it isn't actually designed for pipelining like that.
Well, there's also a chance that this part was coded so long ago that that's good enough. We can use that, and then since then they've decided, well, we want to add this feature, and this is not compatible, because the music engine, it's going to be like baked into the core of Factorio. It probably hasn't changed in 10 years. So as you can see in the picture above, the same sample can be played with different lengths. For instance, the first sample in the picture, number 5, sample 3, yellow. Ooh, yep. This one is played for 3 units of the grid, and then it's played for 4 units. Unless we want to have variants of the same sample saved in many lengths. We don't. We often need to cut a sample short before playing the next sample. When you do that, you can end up with unpleasant audio artifacts or clicks. Similar thing can happen when you're changing playback position in a music player or video player. If you want to try it yourself, what happens? There is a big jump in the audio signal's level, and it sounds like a click or a pop. The signal becomes discontinuous if we want to use big words. You can hear the clipping artifacts in the recording, which is taken using older version. You might need to turn your volume up. It's clear that something has to be done about this. Now, this is going to depend, whether you can hear this or not, is going to depend on your hearing, what's playing the sound, speakers or headphones. It's also going to depend on what's driving your audio, both hardware and software. So this is a bit of a tricky one. I can only barely hear it, and it's something, I think the best way to describe this, and we agreed about this beforehand, it used to happen all the time, like going back 5 years or so in YouTube videos. You'd hear a very high-pitched squeak for like a half a point of something of a second.
Yeah, particularly from older editing software.
Yeah, anytime people cut up the audio and did funny things, if they didn't adjust the audio correctly when they were doing a cut, you'd end up with these weird pops. And some people still get them. Some people still get them in their videos from time to time. People get them sometimes randomly. People that get them constantly. Again, it depends on the software you're using. Software, hardware, all that sort of stuff. I'm going to hit play, but I can...
Sometimes data gets corrupted along the way too.
Yeah, that doesn't help. But yeah,
It's really annoying when that happens.
I can barely hear this, and it's down to my audio hardware. My audio hardware is tuned to take that stuff out. So they say the best way to solve this is fade in or out the audio samples over a short period of time, let's say 1 millisecond or 10 milliseconds, as they come one after another. The way the transition is nice and smooth, continuous, you might find some audio processing applications do this sort of thing automatically by default. Sounds straightforward, and SEL Mixer provides a way to fade in and fade out samples. What's the problem? The built-in fading function of SEL Mixer calculates the same target volume for the entire chunk being mixed in 11.6 seconds intervals. This means the entire fade will come into the mixing interval, will end up with just one volume, so there's no fading at all. Not to mention it's possible to time the fade out accurately. Luckily, the mixer provides support for attaching filters, effects to samples. The filter can do whatever we want with the audio data. We're running around fader with sample level precision again. Those are the audio signal samples, as the filter is trivial. Add an option to delay the fade to the exact moment we need, and voila, no more annoying clicks. Yes. So they mentioned some things do this automatically. You and I were both using Sony Vegas to do our video editing, going back, a couple of years now.
A bajillion years.
Yep. And anytime you put in a cut in the audio, it would put in just a small, like 10 millisecond, 15, 20 millisecond fade in and fade out where you put in the cut. And that was to avoid these sorts of pops. And I think in my whole time doing videos, I've only had maybe 1, 2 per quarter, so 4 a year, where something like this slips in. I've had more mistakes where, going 12 layers on a video audio file, I've misaligned a layer by a few seconds, or put in a blank frame for, 30 seconds, 20 minutes, whatever it happens to be. More major mistakes that are entirely my fault than random audio pops.
Music is missing from an intro.
Yeah, because we're on a different... Because the recording software failed, and I had to use a different audio track, and therefore I forgot to move the audio track for the intro, because the audio track we had to use instead was normally muted, because it's the backup track. Yeah. Yeah, see, stuff like that happens. Yeah. So... also important. It's important when it comes to aligning all the layers and sub-layers together. They need to be aligned, synchronized into a time grid defined by the smallest unit for a given track. The first example uses 286 milliseconds, 12,600 sample time unit. When the SDL audio thread is mixing, it needs to lock the audio device to avoid race conditions with other threads the rest of the game. Only one thread can change the active audio resources at a given time. For the same reason we want to start playing a sample, the audio device is locked. Even if some layer of a variable track doesn't start playing for some time after the track itself has started, we can't wait with the starting layer because we have no way of starting at the exact time. There's no way to start playing in X milliseconds function, and if there was, would still be the problem mixing in chunks, as I mentioned already. So we need to start all layers at the same time to have them align correctly. The inactive ones will be playing silence, which is a weird way of doing it, but again, I perfectly understand because the example Mojo just gave. Normally, when I edit and render my videos, there's a backup track in every single one of them that's just muted for the whole video. Yeah. The audio thread can jump back and lock on the audio device at any time. If we have bad luck of it happening the moment we started the first 2 layers out of total 5, for example, the remaining 3 layers would be started 11.6 milliseconds later out of alignment. The SDL mixer does not provide explicit locking functions. The SDL itself does provide them. However, SDL mixer tries to acquire the lock for most operations. So a little tweaks were necessary anyway. It's not a difficult thing to add. Similar problems need to be addressed when the layer is not playing anything in the middle of a track. It can't just be stopped because then we could restart at the precise moment we need it again. It's left playing at silence aligned to the same grid. So lots of audio alignment problems.
Makes every audio engineer just cry in a corner.
Yeah. Audio is a pain. Audio is a giant pain in the ass. It's super important, but it's a giant pain in the ass. So, from what we've
buffer latency to them, just how's your buffer latency today?
Oh my god. Okay. So, from what we've heard of the pseudo music so far, I actually don't have a problem with it. I think it's great.
Like, yeah, it's a pretty good idea.
It's not gonna be something that you're gonna enjoy hearing like you enjoy hearing the official soundtrack. You enjoy hearing the official soundtrack, like the new tracks that were added to Captain Industry with the latest update too. The new tracks are great. I really enjoy listening to them. I enjoy listening to the old soundtrack as well. As they mentioned last Friday Facts, you know the sound of Factorio when you first open it up because it plays the same bit of music every time. Captain Industry is the same. Like when you open it up, it plays that single track and you're like, yes, it's Captain Industry time. You're not going to have that with these little sample sentence paragraphs, letter soups, word salads. They're going to be fine.
Soup and salad.
Yeah. It's something that's just going to fill in some of the blanks, and as long as it's mainly on theme, I don't really see an issue. And it's not going to be the same caliber as the other music, which is, well, as they mentioned, it's mixed, it's recorded, it's then mixed, then it's mastered. This is not going to have the mastering layer. So mastering is where somebody goes through and then basically takes a very polished cut and then applies a bit more polish to it. And then does things like the fade in and fade out of different tracks and that sort of stuff and slides things together, moves things a little bit this way and that way. And it just gives it a little bit more polish, a little bit more crisp sounding. So it just doesn't have that layer. And because you don't hear it all the time, I actually think it is a great addition. Anyway, frequently asked questions from last week. Which music players when remotely viewing different surfaces and when we switch surfaces? Where do you work this out? It's going to be whatever track is aligned to that surface or planet, whether you're there or whether you're just using remote view.
Which admittedly did seem kind of obvious.
It did seem obvious. They do say the progress of the current track for each surface is remembered. So when you switch back to that surface that had the music interrupted by a surface switch, the track will be resumed from remembering the place and restarting the new track. This way you have an immediate feedback of switching surfaces, including its music, without constantly stopping and restarting it. Currently, the switch happens between different surface tracks happens immediately. However, this might change for some kind of transition. For example, a short fade in, fade out might be added depending on how testing and feedback. They're going to be adding that fade. I guarantee it.
I can't wait to see how spamming between the two locations plays out.
Oh God. You're right, because it's probably going to be as simple as something as pressing M for map view. And I'm
Yeah.
assuming map view is going to bring up the new remote view. And I'm assuming it's going to remember your last location rather than where you're looking, where you're standing right now.
There may be a dedicated remote view button as well. If that's the case, then you could really go wild spamming the two locations.
Well, not only that, they've already said there's going to be, a drop-down list that you can pick the different planets or the different surfaces.
Oh, yes.
Now, if it's a drop-down list, that takes a little bit more time. But if it's just a couple of buttons for 5 different planets, 5 different surfaces, 10 different surfaces, whatever it happens to be, then the spamming back and forth can happen very quickly. Let's put it that way.
Oh, that could be interesting actually with a drop-down list, because then you could hop between the different layers. Also,
Yeah.
auto hotkey exists, so you could make your own mix track by making an auto hotkey script that hops between different layers, different surfaces.
Oh my god. And then you can take those samples and mix them into letters, and then into words, into the sentences, into paragraphs, and then have your own interlude. So, could the music be made?
Oh. Oh god, it gets worse. So you've already got the word soup and the word salad.
Mm-hmm.
You made your own mix track. So
Mm-hmm.
now it's leftovers, and now you've just made a word parfait.
Mojo makes sense one of these days, I'm sure.
I'm
Could
sure
the
someone
music
will get that reference.
Could the music be made more dynamic and react to the game context? In order to not go into technical details last week, we weren't entirely accurate about the music player not knowing anything about the game state. Clearly it knows something to react to which service is being viewed. However, this is only viable from the game state. This is the only variable from the game state the music player takes into account. The engine having these limitations doesn't mean it wouldn't be possible to pass more information along to the music player. That's the easy part. The music itself would have to be composed with such a simple system in mind from the beginning. Years ago, we would need to have all these conditions well defined in advance so Peter can compose it all in a way it would all work together. Those are the difficult parts. I'm not saying it's impossible to do, but we went a different route. Long story short, it's more dynamic music won't be happening for now, and it most likely won't happen. I think the only thing they could add and gain from dynamic music would be combat music.
That would, yeah.
Specialized tracks for biters. That's the only thing they could add.
The funny thing is, I've seen Crypto the Necro Dancer mentioned, and that's in battle, that's the kind of thing where that high level of dynamic change works.
Yeah. And I think that's the only thing. Like, the rest of the soundtrack fits the game well. Like, you don't need special music because you're on a train, or driving a car, or driving around a tank. But combat,
Jump in a train and you get that trailer music.
yeah, that'd work. That would work.
That would work.
Yeah, that would work. Okay. So can we have fine control over the music? No plans to add complex controls like custom playlists or per service settings. A simple mod can be created to achieve that. If somebody really wants that feature, somebody will release that feature within the first week. I promise you. Simple controls are a different story. For version 2.0, we've added options to bind a key to skip the current playing track, go back to the previous track, and to pause, resume the music. I think that's going to come in handy for some people. Like, I know Workers and Resources Soviet Republic, which is I'm playing currently, has 20-something tracks in the soundtrack, and there are 3 tracks I can't stand. They sound like clown music. So, in all my videos, they've been removed. I'm not playing them. I think there might have been the first video, and they haven't come back since. So, will the music be playing all the time? Nope. Same as this is 1.1. There'll be randomized pauses between each tracks, which is one of the reasons I've listened to Factorio soundtrack for 10,000 hours. I'm not sick of it, because there's always a random pause, and it kicks in and kicks out, and it fades in and fades out very well. Most we just tweak the pause duration to fit better lengths to space age tracks. This is subject for feedback from testing. And we'll space
a hangover from its Minecraft roots, where Minecraft would play that one track just randomly after like 2 hours or 3 hours of silence.
Oh, would it?
Yeah.
So I don't play Minecraft, and I would assume that's because bad programming.
I forgot about that.
Bad programming.
Well, it is not. So yeah, it's not the finest quality programming.
Bad programming. So the part of the music engine that's controlling the soundtrack has given up and quit, and then something's activated. And it could be something as simple as a tree, a bird, a creature, or something has made a sound, and then that's got a trigger to go and do something with the soundtrack, and that's rebooted the soundtrack.
Oh, well, back then in Minecraft, if something stopped working, the game would just crash. The game was very fragile at one point.
Okay. And they've asked, will the Space Age soundtrack be sold separately? And they've said, yes, the digital version soundtrack will be available for purchase, same as the base game soundtrack. So the base game soundtrack's already out there. I'm in some ways a little bit disappointed that they're putting out the Space Age soundtrack separately. Like as I mentioned, Dyson Sphere, every update they've done, they've added more to the soundtrack eventually on Steam, sometimes 3 months after the update, and they've added the extra music to the existing soundtrack. So if you bought the soundtrack, you get the extra music as they update it. Captain Industry just did the same when they released it.
That's to get around, to dot around the, or to help deal with the early access stuff.
It might also...
I've got to be careful how I phrase it, because I don't want to necessarily suggest that it's malicious.
Well, it might also be that the original soundtrack was composed by somebody else.
That too, yes.
That could be it. So it could be a licensing thing, because depends on how developers do music with whoever's done the music for the game. Sometimes they get ongoing royalties from dedicated sales. Sometimes they get a percentage of every sale. Sometimes they've just bought the music outright and that's the end of it. So it does depend. So it could be a licensing issue outright, or some gray area of licensing. But yeah, look, Steam does have the advantage if they could put on a sale. Like if you already own the original soundtrack, you get the new soundtrack at 50% off.
They might utilize that as well.
Yep, but
that's a recent feature that's been added in like the last month or two.
No, it's been there for a couple of years. But
the bundle thing.
No, not the bundle thing. Steam's had it for a couple of years where if you own, if version 1 of a game comes out and then you buy version 2, if you already own version 1, you automatically get a discount for blah, blah.
Yes.
But then again, that might fall into, but Woob doesn't do sales.
Yeah, that's a separate problem entirely.
So
the reason I was thinking of it is that the original soundtrack was part of one of the backer tiers, or possibly 2 of the backer tiers.
Yeah.
I forget which ones now.
Yeah, I think that ship sailed. I'm pretty sure if you backed the game back then and you haven't got your money's worth by now,
or if you feel like you haven't got your money's worth, then well, what
it's just never going to happen. It's never going to happen. Yeah.
Just a little too needy.
Yeah. Even if you went in for one of the, really high tiers. Yeah. So I don't think I have a problem with this. Like what we have is tech demo levels so far.
Yep.
It's going to get better. And I think it's going to be quite good. I think you're still going to have 5 dedicated hours worth of soundtrack added to the game, which is going to fill most of the time you're listening to music. Not all of it, but most of it. So yeah,
at least fill the first 5 hours of the 167-hour long Factorio run.
Well,
session.
They did say it was 80 hours.
Oh, there you go. That's halfway to your Factorio session.
Yeah, 80 hours worth, I think they said, is what they're expecting a typical player to take to play the whole base game and expansion. So, one of us, 40 hours, probably. Because the base game we can probably do with our eyes closed, with both hands tied behind our back, blindfolded, upside down. Hey, that's normal state here. But should also mention, very quickly, that Kovacs may or may not have released the release date for Space Age. He did do an interview, and I'm not going to play the video because YouTube, copyright, content ID, blah, 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 blah. But
especially from Europeans.
Well, just YouTube outright. It's
YouTube.
Content ID that I'm watching another YouTube video on YouTube. But that's beside the point. So Kovacs did an interview in Czech. I don't speak Czech, but there's a Reddit post. There's a YouTube link. And one of the last questions the streamer, I guess it was, asked is when do they expect to release Space Age? And he said they're planning to release it in October this year at least.
At the latest.
At the latest. Okay, at the latest. Yes. So planning to release sort of indicates that that's the release date. But
And it seems to
planning
line up with what they've said previously as well.
but planning also means that they're not sure that they're going to hit that date.
Yes, because planning is very different to we are
Yes.
releasing.
So they've got an estimated timeline-ish.
Which means it can still slide by a version 15 or a version 16 a little bit.
It could come out early.
I say that cynically, but
Probably.
they have become a lot better at it. But it also says that we're in April right now, and we still need to see 2 planets, and the rest of the
Combat!
second planet,
Combat!
and we still need to see combat.
Combat! Need to see combat. Need to see what biters I need to fight.
Maybe we'll get your combat next week.
Yeah,
Or
maybe
get
next
more
week.
sound.
I
I
don't
was
think.
actually I actually had one more note with the music. Is
Yeah.
that I do hope I hope it strikes a balance between 2 extremes. You know, with one extreme being going back to Crypto the Necro Dance, you know, where it's really tightly timed rhythm-based thing, and the other extreme is, to pull a very specific example, is that like every time you go into combat, you get Battle 2, and then when you finish combat, you go to Atmosphere 3. It's
Yeah.
another specific reference. Probably
Yeah.
no one will get.
Yeah. Yeah. Look,
Yeah.
I guess music's going to be a bit of a time it will tell. I'm sure somebody's going to release a mod that can just turn off this stuff if you don't like them, and
Guaranteed that'll happen.
I'm sure some people are going to opt to do that no matter what. They'll listen to it once and they'll go, no, I quit, and just turn it off outright. I'm going to leave it on personally. I want to experiment with them and listen to them. And then I don't spend a lot of time listening to the music, listening. It's background sound, 100% background sound. But yes, Mojo's right. We do have October. So we've got a couple of months to get a whole lot of Friday Facts done. I should have probably looked in how many weeks between here and there, but it's going to be 450-ish, 460-ish.
There's not many FFFs away.
Before we've hopefully got everything covered, ready for release. But that's it. I need to call it here because we're going far too long. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. Do hope you've enjoyed. And we'll see you next week for Friday Facts 408, which is going to cover biters, right, Mojo?
Yes, it's definitely going to cover biters this time, and it won't be music again or sound again.
Okay, that's it. We're out. Thanks for watching. See you next one. Bye.
Bye.